whispering, a breath barely there, a secret straining against the seams of silence. Dad, gentle, please. Mom can hear. The words caught, fragile as moth wings, a tremor in my voice like wind sighing through the narrowest crack in a closed door. My throat constricted, a vice around each syllable, as if battling some inner torrent threatening to break free. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. My fingers, white-knuckled, clutched the blanket, the soft fabric offering no comfort. Each shallow, ragged breath was a betrayal, a ragged gasp in the suffocating stillness. The faintest creak, the whisper of settling dust, sent jolts of fear through me, a terror that our forbidden world would shatter, exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light. Close your eyes if you dare and listen. My name is Jenny, and this is a story I swore would remain locked away, buried deeper than any grave. A story I never intended to breathe aloud, but the truth, like a restless ghost, demands to be heard. And the most agonizing truth of all is this: I am the villain of this piece. It's a tale that stretches belief, a plot ripped from the most lurid of films, yet it unfolded in the stark reality of my life. The echoes of that time, those choices, they cling to me, a constant haunting refrain. Forgiveness feels impossibly distant, a star I can never reach. The wounds I inflicted, they were not merely of the flesh, but of the soul, a shattering of trust that can never be fully pieced back together. And try as I might, the past remains indelible, a stain upon my very being. I am a pretty girl, living with my parents in the small town of Carmel by the Sea, California, a peaceful and poetic place. My father, Alex, is the owner of a famous seafood restaurant in the area. He always takes good care of his body and likes to go to the gym, so even though he is nearly 50 years old, his body is still toned, strong, and looks much younger than his real age. He is strong, decisive, but always gentle with me. My mother, Sarah, is a literature teacher at the high school near our house. She's always gentle, delicate, and especially loves classical literature. Every night she often sits by the window, reading books under the warm light, never forgetting to give me advice and deep love. My mother is the one who taught me how to live sincerely and emotionally. From childhood to adulthood, I have always been surrounded by the love of both of them, who have devoted all their hearts to caring for and protecting me. When I was little, every time my father came home from work, I would run to him, throw myself into his arms, my little arms wrapped around his neck, and hug him tightly. To me, my father was always the safest, most secure place. As if just being in his arms, everything would be fine. I didn't think much. I simply felt safe and loved. I was also a liberal girl who loved fresh and beautiful things. I often chose for myself the most beautiful and gorgeous dresses. Every time like that, I would run to my parents, spin around a few times, and wait for compliments. Because they loved me, my parents always smiled, complimenting me with eyes full of pride. Those compliments, though simple, made me feel like the happiest girl in the world. After every dinner, when the whole family gathered around the TV screen, I had a habit of sitting on my father's lap. He often held me in his arms. Those hugs were gentle and warm. I grew up with that pampering to the point that it became a hard habit to break. Even when I grew up, I still kept the habit of sitting on my father's lap, like when I was a child, as if I was still a little girl who needed to be loved and protected in his safe arms. That habit, to me, was a bond, a small joy that I never wanted to leave. But recently, every time I sat on my father's lap or ran to hug him, the feeling was not the same as before. There was something strange in the way he reacted that I couldn't help but notice. He no longer accepted my hugs naturally like before. Instead, there was a pause. Sometimes, his arms tightened a little more than usual. The way my father looked at me was also different. No longer just the gentleness and warm warmth of a father loving his child. There were times when I could clearly feel the confusion in his eyes, as if he was hiding something that I couldn't understand. At times like these, my heart beats faster, as if my intuition tells me that something is wrong, but I don't want to believe it. Maybe I'm thinking too much, maybe it's just a passing feeling. But no matter what, this abnormality always sticks with me, making me feel that things are no longer as simple as before. As I said, my father likes to exercise, so even though he's old, he still maintains a strong and stylish body, like when he was young. He's not only a father, but also a model of strength and charm that I've always admired. When I look at my father, I can't deny that he's still very handsome, with broad shoulders and a toned body, Every time he walks by, I still feel very fond of him. A strange feeling that I can't clearly define. Maybe it was the confidence he exuded, or the strong appearance of my father that still reminded me of my childhood days, when he was my whole world. But lately that feeling was a bit different. It wasn't just the admiration of a daughter for her father, but more like a vague, indescribable feeling. I found myself looking at my father longer than usual, and whenever I was near him, something inside me arose that I felt was unusual. Then one day, as usual, I came home from school, and my father was already home. He always came home earlier than my mother and usually sat on the sofa, watching TV, his eyes glued to the screen. As soon as I walked in the door, I still saw him sitting there, peaceful and familiar. Without hesitation, even though I was grown up, I ran to him, feeling like everything was so natural. I jumped on him, sat on his lap like when I was a child without a second thought. Dad hugged me like he always did, but this time something was different. The hug was still warm, but the atmosphere between us was different, making me feel less comfortable than before. Even so, I tried to push the feeling away, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But it wasn't just a fleeting feeling. I realized that something was touching me as I sat on Dad's lap. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just the uncomfortable position I was sitting in, or maybe it was something in his pocket. But the longer I sat, the more it became clear, like a presence that couldn't be ignored. My heart started to beat faster, and suddenly the atmosphere felt strange, heavy and stuffy. I felt awkward, not knowing what to do. The closeness that had always made me feel safe now made me feel uneasy and uncomfortable. I sat still, trying to keep myself calm, but unanswered questions arose in my heart. Dad's eyes were shy and silent like mine. We both said nothing, just sat in the stuffy atmosphere, until Mom suddenly walked in, breaking the atmosphere. I wanted to stand up, but it felt like my legs were tied down, unable to move. Dad didn't say anything, just silently looked at me, and in his eyes I no longer recognized the familiar warmth of the old days. Then suddenly, the sound of the door opening rang out. My mother walked in, breaking the stuffy atmosphere. We both quickly looked away from each other, and I quickly stood up, trying to act as normal as possible. But the strange feeling was still there, weighing heavily on my heart, like something that could never return to the way it was before. Even though everything looked normal, inside I clearly felt the change. My dad seemed to start caring more about me. He often asked about me, paying attention to the little things in my life that he had never noticed before. He started buying me new clothes and things that I didn't ask for. Those gifts confused me at first, but gradually I realized that this care was not like fatherly love anymore. Then one day, the day when the boundary between me and my father was truly broken, it was a moment I will never forget. That day, my mother had to go on a business trip due to the school's proposal, leaving only me and my father at home. I had just come home from school, entered the house, and before my eyes was a completely unexpected scene. On the dining table, my father had prepared a sumptuous dinner. The atmosphere in the house suddenly became different, almost a bit romantic. The candlelight flickered, the food smelled delicious, and especially 2 bottles of red wine were already placed on the table. I couldn't hide my surprise. My eyes widened as I looked at my father and laughed. "Why are you so thoughtful today?" I still thought it was just a coincidence, a happy surprise, without the slightest suspicion of anything deeper. My father, with his usual smile, replied that he had something good to say at the restaurant, something successful that he wanted to celebrate. I was also happy, didn't ask any more questions, just wanted to enjoy this dinner with my father. We sat at the table eating and drinking together. The wine flowed evenly in the glasses. The soft candlelight made the scene warmer and more intimate than ever. I didn't feel anything wrong at that time. Everything seemed too normal, too familiar. But from within, this closeness gradually took on a meaning, a feeling that I couldn't put into words. We ate and confided, recalling stories from when I was a child, when I was the little girl who always clung to my father's sweet memories, little jokes. All of them made us both laugh, as if all the tension from before had melted away. Laughter echoed in the warm room, and the atmosphere between us seemed closer than ever. After 2 bottles of wine were finished, I felt myself starting to get drunk. My mind was hazy. The alcohol seemed to blur all reason. We sat closer to each other, and I don't know if it was the alcohol or something else, but suddenly, A question popped out of my mouth that I never thought I would ask. "Do you like me?" I asked, my voice soft, but no longer like a child asking a father. That question was not the innocent question of a child, but carried a deeper meaning, as if I was asking from my completely different perspective, a perspective that my sober mind would never allow me to say. My father was silent for a moment. Then he turned to look at me, his eyes deep and thoughtful, as if he was examining something inside me. Then he answered, his voice warm. "Yes." Just one word, but it was heavy and full of hidden meaning. We both looked at each other. In that moment, the space seemed to freeze between us. It was no longer the closeness of father and daughter, but a different connection, beyond all the limits I had ever known. I don't know what drove me at that moment. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the emotions that had been suppressed for so long. Without a word, I gently reached out and hugged my father's neck. A strange feeling invaded my whole body, but I didn't stop, didn't think anymore. I only knew that at that moment, I couldn't control myself. My father paused for a moment, but then he returned my hug. His arms wrapped around my waist, hugging me tighter. The distance between us was no longer there. We looked at each other, our eyes meeting for a long moment, as if no more words were needed. We both seemed to understand each other's hidden thoughts without words. We kissed each other, slowly and cautiously at first, as if we were rediscovering a familiar tenderness. But after a few seconds, the hesitation disappeared, giving way to intense, overwhelming feeling. Our hugs became tighter and tighter, not just to get closer, but as if we wanted to hold on to this moment forever. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt the warmth of my father's body, making everything around me disappear. My father began to gently touch my back. His hands seemed to explore every line, every breath. The initial tenderness gradually gave way to longing and caresses, as if my father could not control the rising desire. His fingers slid over every part of my body, cautious yet greedy, as if he wanted to explore everything without missing anything. Every touch, every gesture made me shiver, as if my skin knew how to respond to his every movement. My father picked me up, gently but firmly, his strong arms holding me tightly, as if he didn't want to let go. I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling each of our rapid breaths. He walked without hesitation, leading me into the room, where there was no light except for the dim light from outside. At this moment, we no longer cared about anything else, not time, not space, but only each other, as if the world had stopped. All thoughts disappeared, leaving only a feeling of intense longing, a deep connection that could not be expressed in words. My father placed me on the bed, and our lips found each other again, merging in sweet but passionate kisses, as if we could not be separated. I could feel his hot breath mixed with the rapid beat of my chest. His hands began to move deftly, slowly unbuttoning my shirt. With each touch, each button undone, the feeling of being naked came not only from the clothes leaving my body, but also from the vulnerability that we were both revealing. That feeling made my heart clench, but at the same time, all the reservations gradually disappeared. That night, we no longer held anything back. All barriers, all reservations were broken, as if the world was left with only the two of us. Every gesture, every touch had a deeper meaning, as if wanting to engrave each other's image into our minds and bodies. We gave each other everything, not just physical intimacy, but also the fusion of emotions, of secret desires that had been suppressed for so long. That night, both of us understood that all boundaries had been erased, and there was nothing but each other's absolute presence in that moment. The next day, when my mother returned home, everything seemed to have returned to normal. My father and I acted normally, both smiling and chatting, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. My mother did not notice the change in the atmosphere. Everything went on as usual. We had breakfast together, talking about everyday things like a normal family. But inside, I knew that we both knew what had happened. Although we kept our natural appearance, deep down, a heavy silence had fallen between my father and me. Every look, every gesture carried a different meaning, as if we were sharing a secret that no one else could know. Even though we knew it was wrong, we did not stop. Our meetings became furtive and hurried, increasing the conflict between guilt and desire. We knew it was wrong, but neither of us had any intention of stopping. Every touch, every look implied that we would continue without words, without promises. Then one night, when my mother was fast asleep, my father quietly snuck into my room, without me hearing a sound. I was still in a deep sleep, completely unaware that my father had been lying next to me, his arms around me. When I woke up, the strange warmth surrounding my body startled me. I turned my head slightly and realized his familiar face was close by. A moment of surprise passed, but then my lips curved into a gentle smile, and I gently hugged my father. In that moment I forgot everything around me, leaving only my father and me. "Gently, Dad, be careful. Mom won't hear," I whispered, my voice trembling like the cold wind blowing through the crack in the door. Each word was difficult to say, as if I was trying to hold back something deep inside that was about to burst. My throat was tight, but my heart was beating strongly, erratically in my chest. My hands unconsciously tightened in the blanket, trying to control the trembling that spread throughout my body. My breathing was now ragged, as if each breath was held back by an invisible anxiety. The room was strangely quiet. The slightest sound or stir, a whisper, made my heart pound, afraid that this secret, our adventurous love, would be revealed to others, exposing everything we tried to hide. The fear of being discovered gradually became an obsession, but I couldn't say no. Every time Dad came, I realized I was stuck in this relationship, unable to stop, even though I knew it would end badly. Then one day, the day I had tried to avoid finally came. That day, my mother called to say that something had come up. She couldn't come home as planned and would only return the next morning. A brief sense of relief passed through me and Dad, when we thought that we wouldn't be interrupted that night. We didn't worry, thinking we still had time until the next morning. My mother suddenly came back earlier than expected, without warning. In our carelessness, we did not realize that she had entered the room. Standing before that scene, she was silent, and I knew everything had fallen apart. The whole world seemed to collapse before her eyes, and in that moment, everything fell apart. I felt suffocated, unable to speak. My father also stood still, unable to find an excuse. The atmosphere in the house was filled with heaviness and tension, leaving no room for tolerance or sympathy. After my mother witnessed the horrifying truth, she did not say a word, just quietly left the house. The atmosphere in the house seemed to freeze. Everything between my father and me also became strange, full of pressure and indescribable embarrassment. We no longer knew what to say or do, after all the secrets had been exposed. The following days passed in heavy silence. My mother did not come home, and finally she filed for divorce. My parents decided to end the marriage that I once thought was unbreakable. The house was now empty and cold, leaving me to face the ruins of a once happy family. I was in a state of chaos, not knowing where to go. Between my father and mother, I did not know what to choose. My father, who had been my support, had now become the source of my breakdown. My mother, who had loved and cared for me since I was little, was now distant, hurt, and carrying an incurable pain in her heart. I realized that my wrong emotions and weakness had led to irreparable consequences. My whole family was broken because of choices that I never thought would lead to this outcome. The damage not only affected my mother, but also me and my father, causing us to lose love and trust in each other. Finally, I understood that all boundaries in family relationships need to be respected. Once they are broken, there is no way back. Love, no matter how strong, cannot fix such serious mistakes. Now I am at a crossroads in my life, not knowing where I will go or who I will return to. I do not know if I can face my father or mother, and I do not know if they still have a place for me in their lives. The family I once had is now just a painful memory, and my path ahead is still very unclear. I only know that I have to find a way to face the consequences of what I have caused, and learn to live with this pain forever. I know that after hearing this story, many people will criticize me, saying that I have done unforgivable things. But that's okay. I understand that everyone has their own point of view, and I am ready to accept all judgmental eyes. The most important thing is that I have dared to face my truth, and accepted the pain and consequences of the mistakes I have caused. My final advice to you who are listening to the story is to always be alert and maintain boundaries in any relationship, especially in the family. Sometimes love and closeness can blind us, leading to bad decisions that we never thought we would make. Remember, every action has consequences, and there are mistakes that cannot be repaired, that can only leave pain and damage that lasts forever. Don't let temporary emotions cloud your mind. Don't let weakness drag you down paths that you will regret for the rest of your life. Respect boundaries, protect love and trust in the family, because once they are broken, there is no way to go back. Sometimes we only have one chance to preserve what is most important, and if we lose it, it will be the most painful thing you have to face. Thank you everyone for listening to my story. If you find the story meaningful, please support me by liking and subscribing to the channel, so you don't miss the next stories. Thank you and see you again.